So from a strictly biological central nervous system brain function standpoint, sleep has what we call a neuroprotective role. So we know that both sleep loss and prolonged wakefulness affects functions of neurons in the brain, including what we call neuronal plasticity, which is the ability of the brain to change structure and function in response to the environment. Sleep loss impacts gene activation and expression, new development of neurons, protects the brain's ability to protect itself from injury or stress. It impacts neurotransmitters, melatonin production, and there's high susceptibility to these toxic effects of sleep loss during the periods of time when the brain is developing most rapidly. And very new evidence, this has come out within the last year, suggests that there is something called a glymphatic system, which eliminates toxins that accumulate in the brain. And it does this during sleep, which essentially allows the brain to have a clean slate from which to work every morning. And furthermore, sleep deprivation and prolonged wakefulness increases stress response and stress hormones, adding further to the kinds of detriments in health that sleep loss can have. And one of the things that is most striking about the impact of experimental sleep loss is its impact on a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which governs what we call executive functions. These are things like decision-making, problem-solving, motivation, being able to reflect on your behavior and change it according to anticipated consequences, modulation of emotions, inhibiting behavior. These are critical skills that are just developing in adolescence because the prefrontal cortex is undergoing its most rapid development during exactly that same time. In addition, sleep loss impacts emotional regulation as well, both the response to positive and negative stimuli. And in fact, we know that adolescents who are chronically sleep deprived are much more likely to report depression symptoms and even to have suicidal thoughts. And according to results from the youth risk survey I mentioned earlier, 40% of teens getting less than 6 hours of sleep report depression symptoms. This is a very serious situation. Sleep loss also selectively affects parts of the brain that are important for what we call reward-related function. And this includes response to reward. These structures, again, are undergoing important structural and functional changes during adolescence. And studies suggest that insufficient sleep is linked to changes in reward-related decision-making, essentially because individuals who are sleep deprived perceive less in the way of negative consequences of their risk-taking behavior, so they're more likely to engage in it. And how does that play out? Well, we know that sleep duration is a negative predictor for alcohol-related problems in adolescents, for example, including binge drinking, driving while drunk, and engaging in activities while drinking that one later regretted. And adolescents who obtained the least amount of sleep on school nights in this particular study cited reported the highest prevalence of alcohol use. And this is, again, data which looked at the Youth Risk Behavior Survey and selected risk behaviors in a large group of high school students and consistently found that students who slept less than 8 hours had a higher prevalence of these risk behaviors, including alcohol use, consideration of suicide, physical fights. Essentially, all of the risk behaviors that they looked at were more prevalent in students who got less than 8 compared to 8 or more hours. We have an epidemic of obesity in this country, particularly in children. And multiple studies have strongly suggested that shorter sleep amounts are associated with an increased risk for obesity. And there are lots of reasons for that, but we know that sleep duration and timing, for example, affect hunger because they directly impact two neurohormones called ghrelin and leptin, which make you feel less full and more hungry. And we know that individuals who are sleep deprived have different patterns of food intake. They eat more, they eat higher calorie foods, they eat higher fat and carbohydrate content foods. If you're too tired to exercise, that's going to impact your weight. And we know that sleep loss and obesity both have adverse effects on cardiovascular function, like blood pressure, and on insulin metabolism and an increased risk for diabetes. And furthermore, sleep apnea is more common in obese children, which further compromises cardiovascular and metabolic health. Drowsy driving, very important issue. As a parent, you would not in a million years knowingly allow your teen to get behind the wheel of a car having consumed 3 or 4 beers. And yet we do that every day when we allow our students to drive themselves to school. We know that from large-scale epidemiologic studies that short sleep duration in adults is associated with a significantly greater risk of mortality from all causes. There was a recent study that was published just a few years ago, which was the first prospective cohort study of childhood sleep duration. So they had data on how much sleep these individuals were getting when they were children, and they followed them for many, many years, till 2009. These were originally healthy children that were followed through their entire lives. And they found a similar relationship. So, for example, 16-year-old male participants who were sleeping 3 hours less than the average, which was the sort of normative or predicted, recommended amount of sleep compared to their peers, were over twice as likely to die from all causes. An overstatement? Perhaps, but it gives one pause.